This is Art History 2, Part 3, and we're continuing with the Northern Renaissance. This is a period where we've seen so far a ramping up in the direction of naturalism. That is, the artists using their opportunities to make pictures where they want to show um, the world as they actually see it. And at the beginning, that was there was just a small step in that direction, and images that were made with you know a greater degree of detail, greater degree of fidelity to the way things appear than previous. And with each step that we've seen, it has moved closer to to naturalism, a greater degree of detail, more in, more instances of showing off the ability to render surface details of lots of different kinds of materials and objects, showing the observed world to to the degree of skill that a given artist happens to have, and each artist has increased those skills until we've gotten to the top end in terms of just pure surface detail naturalism is Yann Van Dyck. And here is a portrait that he did. I'm showing this as an example of his, of portraiture. We haven't seen portraiture yet, but the example that I'm looking at is thought to be as a self-portrait, though it's not for certain. It certainly could be a picture of himself. It looks like someone looking in the mirror. He's looking straight at you, and it's a very dark background. He's wearing a dark colored garment, so that there's almost no information regarding those two things. But his face and also this big red turban are exquisitely detailed. Let's look real close at the what he's done with the face. It's as though he wants to show you exactly everything that he sees. So every wrinkle, every bit of puffiness in the eyes, the yellow in the eyes, the even the I guess the little bit of bloodshotness in the eyes, the sagginess of the face, the not quite shaven, a little bit of whiskers, and even little white whiskers in there, showing his age. There's no attempt at all to idealize the face at all. It's almost like he wants to do a scientific analysis of his face and just show what it looks like. So I mean that's fine. That's something we haven't seen before for a face, but we've seen instances where there's kind of a scientific analysis of other things, like how to represent brass and how light reflects off of it so that you can tell that it's brass or glass or any of the other materials that we've seen. But here we've seen it in a face, and it's striking in that we recognize this as a person, and that we who living in our times, we know what photographs look like. This looks for all the world like a photograph of a person. And how in the world would anyone get a photograph-looking image at a time long before the advent of photography? And one theory that is put forward is, if when you look at the history of art, when you get up to this point, most everything looks like it's handmade. It's like it's just made by people who are looking at the world and making something and getting closer to one degree or another to the way things look, but never into the what we think of as a photographic look, until we get to this year, this moment in time, in the first quarter, say, of the 1400s, when things change. Some artists start reproducing the world with a degree of fidelity that no one has seen before, and people think, well, maybe they're using, if not photography, something like photography, where either lenses or concave mirrors are employed. And a documentary by David Hockney explores that possibility, and he shows some possible ways that those things could be used to at least get the positions of things accurately drawn onto an image, onto a surface, so that once you have positional accuracy, then comes the observation of just the surface detail, and you don't have to worry about getting everything in the right position. And looking at this face, it looks positionally accurate. Another bit of evidence is that the process of using some sort of dark room, some sort of lens where you have the artist is in the dark and the subject is in the light, is that the subject eyes would be, the pupils would be really small, and which is the case here. And it is in the case in other sorts of portraits that have that sort of photographic look to it. It's not for certain just what they used or how they employed it. And of course, this would have been kind of a trade secret among artists who are unionized. They have a guild for artists, and they teach their secrets to their students, and the students teach their these passed on secrets to the next generation, and they keep them secret because when things get out, then you lose to competitors. So there's a reason why we wouldn't know this, and it's not like there's kind of a lot of technology that was secretly known about. I mean, the kind of things that are required to do this are just mirrors, certain kinds of mirrors, which exist in the pictures, images of mirrors, and also lenses, which also exist. Images of lenses exist in pictures by Yann Van Dyck, and so it's not like there's some contraption that they had that we don't know about, a secret contraption. It's just knowledge of how to use things to make this kind of image. Let's look at a painting by him that is one of his masterpieces. It's called the Arnolfini portrait, or it's also called a wedding portrait, because for most of the time of his existence, it was thought to be a wedding between two people, and it may very well be that, though other people have suggested other scenarios that this may be. But what we see is two people in a room that are, a man and a woman. They're dressed lavishly in very expensive clothes, and it's a bedroom, and it has filled with all the objects you would expect to be in a bedroom. There's some peculiarities about it, and I'll talk about those. But the thing is, it looks like a real place, and it looks very recognizable. Every surface is just lovingly drawn, and the surface detail is given a kind of exactitude in terms of texture and color and form, so that we believe all of these objects are real. And this even to a greater degree than the prior artist, Robert Campin. And when we look at the space of the picture, just the people convincingly drawn in a space, it's much more convincing than Robert Campin's, which is kind of jumbled up in an odd way, as though the artists were only interested in surface details and objects, without any interest at all in how they relate in space to one another. Around the time this was painted, in the early 1400s, is when perspective, that is the geometric invention used to draw accurate space, or the illusion of space, was invented in Florence. In the 1410s, between 1410 and 1420, somewhere around in there. And so this artist could have known about it, but he lives in Northern Europe, so he wouldn't have known about it. And if you try to analyze this picture in terms of the what do you call it, the orthogonals, the things that would point down to a vanishing point, they actually don't line up. So he's not using a system like that. He's just eyeballing it. That is, he looks at the world and depicts it so close to the way it actually looks that it's just convincing enough. Let's look at some of the features of this thing. We can look really closely at some things like the dog. Every hair of the dog is painted. This looks like it's just a horribly complex thing to do. I mean, all the different colors of hair, and each one is so finely drawn that it seems impossible for this to even exist. Yet it does, and it looks exactly like a particular breed of dog, though it doesn't look especially alive. It could be a stuffed animal, but it's even so, it is as real as it can possibly be, you would think. And something like this, the clogs, these wooden shoes, they have some mud on them from having been walking in the street, and you can tell the leather material and the whatever this sort of wooden material that it's made out of, and just the lighting on it, the little shadow there, and the shadow that's being cast by it, and the softness over here, and it's this shadow is sharp here when it's close to the object, and it gets fuzzy as it goes away. Like, these observed details are a degree of observation of the real world that seems to go beyond in anything anyone else had ever done. Why is he even wearing shoes? I mean, why he's got shoes over here, and his feet are in stocking feet, and I think the wife is also barefooted because her shoes are over here. So why would that be? Well, it's one of the clues, I guess that you would say if this is a wedding portrait, then they're standing. This is a sacrament they're performing. It's holy ground, so they're taking their shoes off, and that's part of it. They even have this pose, putting your hand up as if you're making a pledge and holding your hand. That's something you do in a wedding, so that makes sense. Look back here, you can see there's a signature. It says Johannes Van Eyck, or De Eyck, is in Latin, was here. So instead of saying that he made it, which it could have said, and other paintings where he's just saying that he made this and he put his name, would have said that. But here, saying that he was here, it's almost saying he's a witness. And this kind of scripty calligraphy that he's done is the kind of thing you would have on a legal document. So if this wedding is a legal document to demonstrate that these people are married, then that would kind of make sense to do that. If it is the case that that's the correct interpretation, then it's the only one of them. I don't know any other marriage that was documented by a painting like this. There's also a mirror in the background. It's not any kind of mirror. It's a convex mirror that is projecting out toward us, so as to create this sort of roundness. It distorts everything. You see the curvature here. This is what happens when you have a round mirror, and you can see, because it's behind them, you can see their backs, and they're oriented. This is the man's back on the left side, and the woman's back on the right side. And you can see also there's people back there. There's a person wearing a blue outfit, and there's a red one back here, but the resolution of this thing doesn't show it. But there's another person back there as well, and I've been told that it's like a red turban, so it might be the artist back there. So witnesses and a document and all these other things, the fact that it's a bedroom, like a wedding bedroom, there's the saint here being depicted in the thing. There's a patron saint of childbirth. All those sort of things sort of lend credence to the interpretation that this is something to do with wedding. But there's other people have interpreted it other things. So, but for our purposes, we're looking at the style of the thing. How is it that this is the way it looks? Why does it look this way? The artist is clearly showing off his ability to render all of the details of the world, and showing that he has observed everything, and he has tremendous amount of skill in manipulating paint to give these illusions. The accoutrements of these three people, their clothes, the fur-lined clothes here, and the silky-looking sleeve, whatever material this is, and whatever kind of cut that you do to cloth to make this sort of pattern on it, are all probably extraordinarily expensive, and they want to show off what the they're spending a lot of money on clothes. That they're well to do, they're rich. This fur probably looks like ermine of some kind. This is probably sable over here, or fox fur, or something that's this just fabulously expensive. And he was a merchant in textiles, so that would make sense that he's showing that off. So all of these things are just those characteristics of Yann Van Dyck. He paints with supreme fidelity to observational details. But when you come to this part of the picture, this seems to be in another league altogether. This is a chandelier, and it's made of brass. You can tell that because the way the light is shining on it, and it's a very complex shape. It would be a hugely or too complex a shape to render in perspective. The system of perspective can allow for something like this, but to draw it would be beyond most people's means, and very few people would even go to the trouble using perspective. Yet the perspective of it is completely accurate. I mean, it looks, for all the world, again, like a photograph. I mean, and how could you have such a thing that looks like a photograph in a picture long before photographs were even invented? Well, this is another one of those things where people suggest, well, maybe he's using some sort of device. In the documentary by David Hockney, he demonstrates this particular device, this chandelier, in showing how it could have been done using the sort of technology that they had. He uses a convex mirror, the reverse of this, if it were silvered on the inner side and used to take the light from a window like this, you can project that light using this onto a surface. And when it comes onto the surface, you could have a picture as if it were projected with a film projector or a video projector onto a surface, and it looks exactly like a photograph image. But instead of, in photographs, you have chemicals that fix an image. But if you, instead of chemicals, you had just an artist there to trace out the outlines, that would at least give you the perspective of the thing perfectly, so that you could get such a clear image of this thing. It wouldn't help you that much with the tonality. The tonality is an incredible feat in itself. Just to, you have light coming in from the window, and the light hits this metal thing from all these different facets, and everyone sees the light in a different way. So you have to differentiate the way light looks in the light, in the shadow, in the partial light, in the cast shadows, and all the other things that are going on in it. That just has to be done by eye. But if you at least had the outline of the thing drawn, using some sort of lens, then you could come up with something like this if you're tremendously skilled. And of course, Yann Van Dyck was. Here's another closer image, but not as good at a reproduction. But you can see that there's stuff back there. There's some indication that there's another person back there. So two witnesses. There's even little paintings in the mirror. These little things, these indicate the Passion of Christ. Again, with we saw in other Northern Renaissance works, is that they fill the picture with objects like the rosary beads, the broom, the Margaret, St. Margaret image, the fact that there's one candle lit, the fruit, everything, in addition to being a real object that would be in this, ordinarily in this real space, also is symbolic of other things. It's telling some other story, a little secret story that you need to know. This represents this kind of, background knowledge to interpret things, and that's just a northern thing as well. Okay, let's go to the next work by Yann Van Dyck, who's also his brother Hubert was also contributed to this. It's called the Ghent Altarpiece. Ghent is Ghent, and it's a city, name of a city, and this is the big altar for for their church. It's very big and complex. It's got large panels put together with hinges so that they close and open, and this would be the full open um, version of the thing. And when it's closed, there's pictures on the back. You can see the pictures there. This is what it looks like on the back. That image that you just saw of like Adam here and Eve, they're in the skinny panels. When you close it, the back side of those panels look like this. And these are the backs of the other panels. I can show you. No, I can't. I thought I had a picture, but I don't seem to have a picture. There's I'll show close up in a second. But here we see a program of images with God the Father here in the center, looking like Christ with a scepter and holding, making a blessing gesture, and he's got a crown down here, and he's got all sorts of calligraphy written in the arches above his head. He's jewel encrusted. Mary's on one side, and John the Baptist is on the other side. Music playing angels are flanking them, and Adam and Eve, with little stories of Cain and Abel up at the top there. The bottom has one continuous space with like a large landscape with imagery from Revelation, with the Lamb of God on an altar here with angels around it, and all the the heavenly hosts, the saints, clergy, other people are around in all different places, congregating around in this landscape for the event that's occurring here. On the back, we have this sequence of panels right here is one continuous space. It looks like an upper room where Gabriel and Mary are. This is the Annunciation, and up here there's prophets and their prophecies written on scrolls that are flowing around. On this part, there's a couple of saints painted as if they were sculptures in niches, and the patrons who paid for the thing flanking either side there, with the man on this side kneeling and praying, leaning towards the right, and the woman kneeling and praying, looking towards the left, as in they're sort of looking up. Their gaze is looking up into this space, similar to the Portinari Altarpiece, where you have the Annunciation and the patron sort of meditating on the Annunciation. But in this case, the world that is being painted is even has an even greater degree of accuracy and observed detail. The sculpture, by the way, that you see here is reminiscent of the kind of sculpture we saw in the Klaus Schluter's Well of Moses. Big, voluminous drapery with his huge crinkles in it. The kinks. There's a lot, especially the sharp sort of kinks to it, and it's heavy, and it covers the full figure, so you don't see the figure underneath, the body underneath. That's a Schluter thing. But the figures up here with this kind of drapery looks a lot like the Robert Campin kind, where it also covers the body, but it spills over in this decorative cascades onto the floor. We have a close-up, a little bit of the central panel of the inner side, and we can see that every person in it, look kind of closely, these look like perhaps the disciples, I would guess, or maybe there's an order of monks, I don't know, but there's popes, other clergy, bishops, miscellaneous other people. There's martyrs, the people who are having palm leaves, carrying palm leaves, or the female martyr on this side, and there's other martyrs on this side. There's a variety of people. Each one is wearing different costume, has different face. All of them, are individuals and observed as portraits of people. Then you have the angels here around, a convincing space of angels on the ground that's covered with plants, and the plants are probably accurate representations of real plants. And the Lamb of God, the symbol of Jesus bleeding into a cup, and has light shining from it, and a cross over here. I think this is the pillar um, of that he was tied to when he was beaten, or the flagellation of Christ. I think I'm sure they have the other attributes of his crucifixion that are around there as well. A very wonderfully uh, uh, atmospheric perspective of a distant landscape, which I believe is Bruges, or some other northern city in the Low Countries, with accurate representations of all of the buildings over there. The Holy Spirit over here, shining lights of gold, or streaks of gold holding in the sky. And there's another. If you look at this church in relationship to that church that we saw in the Duccio, you can see that he even has a greater degree of detail, and the lighting on it is consistent with everything else. So in addition to all of the details of surface texture and color, there's add to that lighting. The plants, all the leaves, every leaf is individually painted, and there's a variety of orientations of each leaf, so that you have some going one direction, other direction. So it looks perfectly believable as if it were a photograph of a real bush. Same with all the other plants and the flowers and all the other things. So again, with the detail and the observed world that is represented. Spatially, it is kind of weird. We're looking at all of these people as if we're looking straight at them. We're on their level looking at them for these people, but these people we're going to look down on. The whole landscape we're looking down on in some kind of, like we're up in the air, like with a drone looking down on a landscape, yet these people aren't in that same angle. So again, with the ambiguity of space and the disregard of the measured space that we will see when we go to look at the Italian works. They are very interested in spatial relationships and how they and how things relate to one another in terms of the structure of space. In the North, not so much. It's the surfaces it's their main goal. And when you come to the surfaces, they want the surface to be as dazzling as possible. So this is the head of Mary in the front panel when the thing is opened, and you can just a glimpse of what just a little bit of that opulence is. Pearls, rubies, sapphires, jewelry of all kinds, lilies coming out of here, and each one having some sort of symbolic meaning to it. Little bit starbursts that are gold. The lettering, look at the lettering. It looks like it's not just ordinary lettering, but it looks like it's carved into a surface and then gilt, and the carving, the little edge of the carving that looks like when you carved it and it makes a little lip around it, that's painted, and the way the light is playing on the inner sides of that facet. It's just incredible, all the kinds of things that are observed, and it's like he's making the job as hard for himself as possible. Again, the detail everywhere. There's enough detail in this handprint to if you were a palm reader, you could tell his future by looking at those lines. The elaborate jewels, greater than any real jewels that had ever existed. I guess this is crystal, and they're showing how light flows through this material so as to make it translucent and transparent, and how light reflects through it and all that. Everything more and more, and wherever you look, your eyes are just dazzled with the opulence and glitter and treasure of the thing. And we're a long way removed from that Sutton Hoo jewelry thing, in terms of time. But it's still that same way of looking at the world, that in order to make something special, you put a lot of work into a small space. And as spaces go, this is actually kind of big compared to that jewelry, but they've grown up more. They have more sophisticated things, and artists who live in this, the decade that this was made, they had Robert Campin to beat, and Robert Campin had the Limburg brothers to beat in terms of the competitions, like who can make the most opulent surface detailed images. So our next artist is Rogier van der Veen. And he, we have one picture by him, and it's called the Descent from the Cross, or the Deposition. This is an image. It has several qualities that Yann Van Eyck has, but he goes in a different direction in some other qualities, because if there's a deficiency at all in the Yann Van Eyck, it is that the people in all his works they don't seem to be particularly alive. The Adam and the Eve, none of them are expressing any emotion. It's almost like they're mannequins. And as mannequins go, he represents them with all of the fidelity that is humanly possible. But here is an image of the focus is on the people and their humanity. What we're looking at is a large group of people in a very small, compressed space, and they're filling that space almost completely, so that you can hardly tell where they are. But if you had to guess, it would be a shallow niche in a wall. That is, there's a wall here and there's a wall back there, and it seems to be that it's only big enough for a couple of people to stand in, deep, and they're filling this space as if they're sculpture in a niche, and that they're a tableau of actors in a church play representing the deposition, rather than representing what the original scene would have looked like. And of course, they would not have known what it looked like, because none of the people doing any of these sorts of paintings would have been to the Holy Land and to see what Golgotha looks like, the place of the skull where the crucifixion occurred. And had they been there, I'm sure they could have, like Yann Van Eyck, could have made a perfect representation of it. But since they don't know, they have to make things up. And if you're going to make something up, the thing that they have in their world that is the closest thing is the kind of plays that would be put on, like they have even in churches today, when they want to have either a nativity, they would get congregational members, put costumes on, and perform the nativity, or the crucifixion, or the deposition from the cross. Any of these sort of things could have been play acted, and this has that sort of look of people performing the event. This niche that they're in, we only have just a little bit of it to tell, and the reason is because everybody's filling it, and it's filling it in such a way so as to, give a kind of a tension, to cause us to feel tension in that they're crowded in this space, and even this sort of the formal element of this curve, echoing the curve on this side to create a kind of a parentheses that is sort of pushing everything in, and this arch right here is also containing everything within this space. It's kind of odd to have this little extra square sticking up on top of this horizontal rectangle, but that is to accommodate the cross, which is diminutive. It's not made to look like the actual cross. It doesn't look big enough, but it's just like a symbol of the cross. And there's the man back there who's assisting and helping Christ down, but he's like just an actor assistant in this event. The artist wants you to see these people as humans. They're crying. They have tears in their eyes, and they're expressing emotion. This gesture of wiping the eyes, the tears coming down, the tilt of the head, these tears. This sort of gesture looks rather dramatic, like the sort of thing that an actor in a play would do, so that the people in the back could tell, oh yes, this person is sad, because you can tell by that gesture it's indicating lamentation. So we have that. It's more human and more believable and more emotional than than Yann Van Dyck. But in terms of surface detail, he's in the same league. Looking at this outfit by this character, I think it's either Joseph of Arimathea, maybe this is Joseph of Arimathea, or one of the other participants in the deposition. He's wearing the most elaborate of silk, woven silk pattern outfits with fur all over it, or on the edges of it. But look how the pattern flows around every distortion of the cloth that comes from the way cloth moves and folds and cascades and does all these little kinks and things. The pattern goes around it and conforms to it, which is just an extra special difficult thing to do compared to, say, the same sort of image in the medieval times or even the proto-Renaissance time in Italy, where the patterns tend to not go around the surface but are flat. This is not only is a complex pattern, but having conform to this really shows off the level of difficulty that he's trying to demonstrate. The lighting, the surface detail, all of the material details, you can tell one material from another, the different kinds of cloth, the different textures of cloth. This is really subtle pattern right there. It's kind of neat. This red, velvety-looking sleeve, which doesn't have any reason other than just to show off the painter's ability to represent it. It looks like an individual person. The little veins in his head, and the puffiness of his face, the lines around his eyes. Everything tells me that this artist has observed the world and wants to show you every single thing that he's ever seen in the world. Christ, looks dead. It looks, the blood coming down here on his face, the crown of thorns looks painful. The veins coming out in his arm, and the wounds. All of these things are observed details so as to really let you see all of the stuff. Wonderful rendering of drapery here, and just the tonality of it, the part that's in the shadow. Observing light and shadow is part of this world of representation that the Northern artists have. That is just incredible what they can do. The criticism that the people in Italy would have of these sorts of things when they finally do get to see what the northern artists do is that they're impressed with the detail, just like anybody would. I mean, it's just astonishing what you can do. But drawing is lax in a lot of places. Things, if there's any kind of distortion, like this hand looks strangely distorted. The poses look a little distorted. Things look a little awkward in some places, and that has to do with drawing. And in order to draw properly, according to the way Italians look at the world, you have to understand the structures of things, the underlying structures, and if you're just looking at the surface, that means you're not understanding the underlying structure, and so they would criticize the Northern artists with, "Hey, you don't understand the drawing aspect of it," even though I grant that you're better than we are at the surface. Though that's true in many of the Northern artists' work, but looking at this figure of Christ, I don't know how you could get any better than that, even in any culture. That looks as accurate as could be. All right, this last one for the North, for what we're calling in the 1400s, is an interesting picture. It's by Hugo van der Velde, and it's called the Portinari Altarpiece. It's a nativity scene. It's in 3 panels. The outer 2 will fold over in front of the middle part, and the reproduction I have has erased the frame itself, but you can see just the panel, the images. The reason it's called Portinari is because that was the name of the patron, and the patron was Italian. And when he had this commission to paint by a northern artist, he had it shipped back to Florence. And when it went to Florence, it caused a stir, because finally those people in Italy got to see what northern artists looked like, and this is just streets ahead of anything that they were doing in terms of its surface detail. So what we're looking at, we haven't seen a nativity before, but here we have Mary in the middle. She's kneeling on the ground, and there's the Christ is on the ground instead of in a manger, but still he's on the ground there, and there's the image of the wheat representing the bread of the Eucharist, and the wine is represented by the image on this little jar here. You can zoom a little. So the Eucharist is represented here, and the fact that Christ is lying on the ground, it's like the bread lying on the altar, and presenting Christ in a manger is like presenting the body of Christ, the Eucharist, the bread, as on an altar. So they're symbolically related. The word manger means to eat, and it's an eating trough. Like this is an eating trough called a manger. And when Christ was put in the manger, he was put as an offering, as a representation of that offering. And the artist has put objects in the picture, just like the other artists we've seen, that look like they could be there anyway, yet they also have, in addition, a symbolic meaning. This jar is holding some flowers. The flowers have lilies, and the flowers are lilies, and they're symbolic of Mary, as well as these. Each one has a symbol, and it relates. The shoes on the ground are, because of holy ground. This is the birth of Christ, by the way. This is Joseph on this side. On this side, you have the shepherds who have been announced to by the angel up here. There's a little story of the shepherds, and being told they would find the Christ wrapped in swaddling clothes. So they've come to look, and the artist has represented them as realistically as he could, because he wants them to distinguish them from the more ideal images of Mary and Joseph as farm workers, as just ordinary people. But he's made them, even though they're ordinary, he's made them as sympathetically as possible, so that they look worthy of being here at this moment, because the angels thought that they were worthy, because they are the ones who chose them to come and see. Oddly, there's different scales. The shepherds and Mary and Joseph are in one scale. The human beings are in one scale, but the angels are at another scale. They're angels around, kneeling on the ground, looking, and they're at a sort of small diminutive scale. And even though they're represented just like the other people, and just what you would expect them to be represented, as if they were real. They have real wings, they have real clothes, the ecclesiastical-looking clothes, the cope, and all this other stuff. This tie that looks like a kind of thing, church clothes of some kind. Yet they're small. They look real, but small. Even the ones up there are of that same scale. So I guess the artist wants to make a distinction, even though everything has the same sort of reality. I suppose he could distinguish them by making them transparent, or having some other quality that made them distinguished. But in this case, he's decided scale was the signifier. Another thing is the buildings. The buildings are in ruins. The reason this building is like it is because it's in ruins, and it's represented that way because when the Nativity occurred, it represented the Roman Empire was still strong, but we know from history that the Roman Empire fell, and that Christianity took its place. And so the birth of Christ was a sort of a harbinger of that coming fall of the Roman Empire. So it's typical to have imagery of ruins, Roman ruins specifically, in a nativity scene. But how would the person in the north know about Roman ruins? Because they didn't experience them the way the people in Italy did. In Italy, they have Roman ruins all over the place, and they're only more sparsely scattered in the north. So this artist, he had to paint the kind of architecture he knew about, which was Romanesque architecture, which from the Middle Ages, and so he uses that as his model of the Roman Empire, even though chronologically it's a little out of date. Let's look at the wings here. On one side, we have the patron's wife kneeling with the patron's daughter, and this side here's the patron here with his son, or two sons over here, and some saints. And the saints' names are the names of the patron saints of these people, so that they, there's a connection between these people and their saints, and they're all witnessing the event, just like we've seen in Yann Van Dyck's Ghent Altarpiece and the Robert Campen Altarpiece. They have the same sort of patrons viewing the scene. And they're represented just like everything else with the same sort of opulence and degree of detail and wearing their finest possible clothes, and with the same degree, everything is real as it could possibly be made, except again, the space. Look at the space of the floor that they're on. The floor seems to be kind of tilted up, and things are not consistent within that space as if it's seen from one point of view, which of course it wouldn't be. If you're just drawing things as individual vignettes and putting them together almost like a collage, rather than seeing everything from one point of view, which is what you would have if you were using one-point perspective. And being in the north, they haven't got it yet, or at least they're not using it yet. Even when they do get it, in the north, the first northern artist who actually uses one-point perspective, doesn't really use it in such a way so as to make the space really clear. They really don't get it as in the north like they did in the south. At least not in this century. Later, there will be a mixing of the two in the 1500s, and you will see artists in Italy who paint with certain characteristics that came from the north, and artists in the north who have characteristics of imagery from the south. So only in this particular century, or especially 2 centuries if you count from 1300 to 1500, are you're talking about the worlds where there's a strong contrast between the two. Okay, the next thing we'll look at the Italian Renaissance.